Let's start with a quick chazara. We're at the end of the Mishnah. The Mishnah concludes, excuse me, with the Trumas Hadeshen. Says the Mishnah, again, we're about 10 lines down. The first line is Vahilech Loi. Start with a quick chazara to get everyone up to date. Me. She'll write to Litter Mesamizbeach. Anyone who wants to do the Trumas Hadeshen, Mashkin gets up early, V'tayvel, and goes to the mikvah. When? Before the Mamaina comes. Who's the Mamaina? The kind in charge of all these things. Mamaina says, Misha, when does the Mamaina come? Like Alitim Shavais. Pamim Sheuba, Mikros I gather when the rooster crows. Okay, so what happens? Hamamaina ba, the Mamaina shows up. He knocks at the door. They open up the door for him. Amr lehen, Misha Tava, whoever went to the mikvah Yavai v'Yafis. Let him come and be involved in the lottery. Hey Pisu, they perform the lottery. Misha Zacha, the one that wins. Zacha boy. Says the Gemara, and really, this whole Amid could really be summed up in one question. What's the Makar for the three places that the Kayhanim watched? Which we know is Beis Avtinas, Beis Anitzitz, and Beis HaMoikad. What is the Makar? To speak it out outside, there's two Makaras. Either because the Pasuk says, Moshe, Kama, Aroinu Banav. Moshe is in one place, Aroinu Banav is in another place. That's Makar number one. Aroin and his two children equals three. Makar number two was what? Shaimrim Mishmeres Le Mishmeres. Now let's read it together inside. Minan immediately, what's the Makar? Amar Abayo, Amar Kra. So what do we see in the pasuk? We see Shemira. We see Shemira by the Kohanim. Asks the Gemara Amri. They said it's good. It's right. Shemir Baal Mashchan. You brought me a raya to the concept of Shemira. However, Miu Masnisa Katani, what does the Mishnah say? And again, it's not our Mishnah. It's the Mishnah on Midais. And what is the pasuk that we just quoted say? What does the pasuk say? Moshe as the Levi are Nubanav. Answers the Gemara, and this is the Makar number one. This is how you read the pasuk. They encamped to the east of Moshe. And then the pasuk continues. Aaron ubanav shemishmeres hamikdash. Aaron bechan makom in one place. Ubanav vishnei makayris equals three places. Says the Gemara, where in the pasuk do you see this? Mimai midersev. The pasuk says ve'achaynim. That's the first part of the pasuk. Uksev, and what does the latter part of the pasuk say? Shaimrim. Chaynim lechod. The encampment by itself. The Shaimrim lechod, and the watching is by itself. Says the Gemara, but how do you know that they're all standing in their own places? Ema kulu b'chad makom lichudei. Araynu ubana, maybe they're all standing together. Says the Gemara, lo hisal gadaitach. Why not? Ma Moshe b'chad makom lichudei. Just like Moshe is by himself. Af araynu ubana b'chad makom lichudei. Mekar number one for the three places that we guard the Beis HaMikdash, Beis Avtinas, Beis HaNitzitz, Beis HaMoikad, Aaron Ubanav. Mekar number two, Rav Ashi Amar Mesefer they crawl into the pasuk says what? Shaimrim Mishmeres LeMishmeres. That concludes Chavav Amud Aleph, which to speak outside this daf, the first daf of Tamid, which is Chavei Amud Beis, Chavav Amud Aleph. To speak it out, I'm going to do it in a global way, which I'm going to be putting the first part of the Mishnah with the Gemara together, right? How did the Mishnah begin? The three places that we watch. Where do we know that from? Aroin Ubanav or Shomer Mishmeres LeMishmeres. Din number one that we learned this daf. Din number two is we learned the differences between Beis Avtinas, Beis HaNitzitz, Beis HaMoikad. Beis Avtinas and Beis HaNitzitz were elevated areas. Beis HaMoikad is a large area with a domed roof, with stadium-style stone, not seating, sleeping arrangements for the elder Kohanim, with the young Kohanim on the floor. Din number 2. Din number 3, what happens if someone becomes Tamid? He goes through the tunnel under the ground with the fires on either side, goes into the base of Tefillah that has a fire there and a bathroom of Kavod. And din number 4, whoever wakes up early to get involved in the Chumas Hadash, and that is the first daf. And as we always say, when we finish the first daf we always know. I think we could all probably say over daf Beis in Sukkah pretty well. The 3 Mekaires for 20 feet, Rabba, Rava, Rav Zera. We could probably even say Amud Beis a little bit. But then after that, it goes downhill. So we always will try that the same way we know this stuff. Mirz Hashem, the Kinyan Mesechtah. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, she'akol nihiyeh b'dorei. Okay, any questions? We're ready to rock and roll. Chavav and Beis. Let's go. Beis Avtinois, ubeis hanitzoitz. Beis Avtinois, ubeis hanitzoitz, ibayilu. What do we know about these 2 places? What did the Mishnah teach us? They were what? We just spoke it out. Elevated areas. So now, before we see the Gemara inside, let's speak this out outside. There's 2 types of elevated areas. Either we have what we'll call a porch. What's a porch that comes off of 1st or 2nd floor? Is there anything that lives underneath the porch? The answer is no. It's an elevated area, but nothing's underneath it. That's one type of elevated area. What's the other type of elevated area? A 2nd floor of a house. Which is what? You have a 2nd floor with a 1st floor underneath it. So asks the Gemara, Beis Avtinoitz, Beis Hanitzoitz were what? Elevated areas. What type? Did they have someone that was underneath it or not? Ask the Gemara, Yibaylo. Aliyos mamish have. Were they actual aliyos, which means that there was something underneath it? Oidelma. To have a givihi, they were tall. Kavaya means tall. They were tall, migba, and high, ke'aliyos, like elevated areas. What was a fundamental question about the Beis Avtinas and Beis Hanitzoitz? We know that they were high up, but were they really high up, meaning they had something underneath it? Or they were high up but had nothing underneath it? Tashema. So obviously, how do we prove such a question? What's the easiest way to answer this question? If we have a raya that what? Who cares? It says bias. Bias usually a house. That's what it means. Good, but we need to have a raya. So how would it be raya? Very good. Rav Avi's right. If I were to show you it's like a house, which means someone's underneath it, that's a raya, that it's a real thing. If I were to show you that maybe there's like Xeris Ikosav or something that says, by the way, you're not allowed to be underneath it, that would also be a raya. Those are the 2 ways. Let's see. Says the Gemara Tashema. Tetinan. We learned in our Mishnah 3 lines down. Chavav and Beis. She Bitzafain. In the north was the Shar Hanitzoitz, which is what we're talking about, right? Talking Beis Avtinois and Beis Hanitzoitz. Shar Hanitzoitz is Beis Hanitzoitz. And says the Braisa, Kimin Achsadra. We know that word Achsadra. What's an Achsadra? Like a porch, very good. Like a pavilion, like a porch. Kimin Achsadra. And what else does this Mishnah on Midai say? And ve'aliyah binuya al gaba. And there was an elevated area on top of it. We don't have a raya yet. Now we have a raya. Sha'koyhanim shoymrim mil malo v'halavim mil mata. The koyhanim are on top floor. The Levim are on the bottom floor. So what we have a raya now. What's a raya? That what? It was a Rio 2-floored matziv. Because if we see that the Levim were underneath, it shows it wasn't a stambo porch with nothing underneath it. It was a 2-floored area. Yes? Nothing underneath it. Why can't it just be No, but it has a usage underneath it. We have a usage. From the fact that the Mishnah Midos tells us that the Kohanim's post is on the top and the Levim's post is on the bottom, that means the bottom is a used area. So says the Gemara, Upesach it had a door, lechel or lechol. So says the Gemara, that's a raya that it was a 2-floored structure. Period. End of question. Again, the question was, what type of 2-floored area? The answer was a real 2-floored area. Now says the Gemara, let's go a little bit deeper. Minna hani mili, Shalom Rav David. Minna hani mili. From where do we know this? Where do we know what? What we just said. What do we just say? Kohanim are on top, and the Leviim are on the bottom. Where do we know that is the case? Which, if you're paying attention, this really is not a question for our Mesechtah. Because the fact that the Leviim are on top and the bottom and the Kohanim are on top was what? A Mishnah in Midos. So really, that's not our Mesechtah. We're discussing just the fact that they were elevated. But once we quote the Mishnah from there that says that they had Kohanim on top and Leviim on the bottom, therefore we continue by proving it. So Minahani Mili, from where do we know this? The Tanu Rabbanon says the pasuk. A pasuk in Bamidbar. V'yilavu alecha v'yisharsucha ba'avodasecha. They should accompany you, and they should work together with you. End of pasuk. So we have clearly someone working with someone, as we're going to see in a moment. This is Kohanim and Leviim. Hakosov midaber. Excuse me, I read the pasuk wrong. Ba'avodasecha is not part of the pasuk. I take that back. One more time. I'm sorry. Let's read that again. V'yalavu alecha v'yisharsucha. Says the Gemara, what is this pasuk talking about? The pasuk is talking about the avodah. Meaning what? Meaning that the Kohanim and the Leviim are doing the avodah together. We don't know what avodah, because we know Kohanim and Leviim have clearly different avodas in the Beis HaMikdash, right? Kohanim do karbanos, Leviim do singing and things like that. We'll get there in a moment. But says the Gemara, it's clearly talking about ba'avoidascha. Asks the Gemara, Atoimer, you're suggesting ba'avoidascha kasamidaber. You're suggesting it's talking about the avodah. Oy einoi, or maybe ella be'avoidasam. It's referring to their avodah. What's their avodah? Their avodah is referring to the avodah of the Leviim. Do you have the psukim on the side of your Gemaras, whatever Gemaras that you have? If you look at the pasuk says, "V'gam es achecha mata Levi." So we're talking about the Leviim. Shevet avicha hakri vitach v'yalavu alecha v'sharsucha ato b'nechi yitach lefnei all edus. So it's talking about the avodah of the Leviim. So it's talking to the Kohanim. It's talking about the avodah of the Leviim. So let's just understand. There's two ways of understanding this pasuk, which what the Gemara is going to say. Either it's saying that at some level the Kohanim should help the Leviim. What would that mean? That would mean in some part of the Leviim's avodah, Kohanim would get involved at some level. Or it means no, that the Leviim and Kohanim do some avodah together. So first we thought the pasuk was talking about ba'avoidascha, referring to the Kohanim. The Gemara says no, it's talking about ba'avoidasam, talking about the Leviim. Kishehu oimer. But now we have another pasuk. This is two psukim later in the Torah. Says the pasuk, "V'nilvu alecha v'shamru." They should accompany you and guard. What does that mean? Again, another pasuk about the Kohanim and Leviim doing something together, and this pasuk says clearly, "V'shamru," and you should guard. L'chol keilav, l'chol avoidasai. So what do we see from that pasuk? Hare ba'avoidasam amur. So that pasuk is clearly referring to their avodah of the Leviim. What do I do with the first pasuk? It's repetitive. Again, it's a little bit difficult just because we don't know Chumash. But if we knew Chumash, this would be very easy. But basically, the Torah has two psukim, and both psukim are talking about the Kohanim and Leviim doing something together. For the fact that there's two of them, the Torah is not saying the same thing twice. So clearly one is talking about doing it with the Levium, and one is talking about doing it with the Kohanim. Okay, so after the long-winded discussion, bottom line, what is an Avodah that they could do together? Kohanim Shaimim Milmala, V'Leviim Milmata. Let's speak this out outside, and then we'll try to go back into the Psukim. There's something called watching the Beis Hamikdash, which is basically all we've been talking about. We already brought the Raya to the 3 places. We also saw already that Kehanim guard in how many places? 3. What about the Leviim? 21. We didn't see that yet. Where the 21 places are, that's tomorrow. But we saw that there's 21 places. So bottom line is, we have a Beis Hamikdash, and it's being guarded by whom? Kehanim and Leviim. We just finished saying that there's a place in the Beis Hamikdash called the Beit HaNitzoitz. And on that place, there was both Kohanim on the top floor, Leviim on the bottom floor. The Gemara wants to know, where do we have a Mikar? Where do we see that in the same location, in the same Avodah, in the same something, Kohanim and Leviim do it together? Says the Gemara, because the Torah is talking to Bnei Aaron. And it says, children of Aaron, accompany the Leviim. So what are you accompanying the Leviim doing? There's one of 2 things. Either the Avodah of the Leviim or the Avodah of the Kohanim. The fact the Pasuk writes it twice, you know what it means? Both. Very good. So what's the Avodah of the Kohanim? Because the Leviim can't do any Avodah of the Kohanim. A Levi can't walk onto the Mizbeach. That's illegal. So what's the one thing they can all do together? Guarding the Beis Hamikdash. So again, from the fact that we have 2 psukim in the Midbar that says v'yalavu alecha, accompany, v'yishar sucha, work together. So one pasuk is going to talk about the Leviim's avodah, one will be the Kohanim's avodah. Now we have our Mekar, very good, that Kohanim and Leviim guard together. Why did we come on to this? Really not for our discussion. We came on to this because we utilize this as a proof that what? Beis HaNitzoitz, Beis Avtinais were elevated areas, meaning they had another floor underneath it. So now when we speak out the original Mishnah, and when we get asked the question, what are the 3 places that the Kohanim watched in the Beis HaMikdash? The answer is Beis Avtinais, Beis HaNitzoitz, Beis HaMikdash. If the follow-up question is, okay, tell me about those places. So the Beis HaMikdash, we know a lot. It's a large area. It has a domed roof. It has these rows of benches for the elderly Kohanim. The younger Kohanim slept on the floor. Givaldik. What about Beis Avtinais and Beis HaNitzoitz? So when we learned the Mishnah, what do we know? It was elevated. Now we found out one more critical ingredient. Not only was it elevated, but it was elevated with something happening underneath it, which was what? Kohanim watching on top, Leviim watching on bottom. Where do we know that from? The 2 psukim in Bamidbar.